Meet Lily Hartman, the no-nonsense wedding planner who's built her career on turning chaos into perfection, all while staying far away from the messy business of love. But when Ethan Blake, the billionaire groom of the season, literally jumps into her car to escape his own wedding, she's thrust into a world of high society drama. What starts as a business arrangement to save Ethan from a loveless marriage soon blurs the lines between pretense and reality. With her dreams of opening her own wedding agency on the line, and Ethan's family pushing their own agenda, Lily must decide, can she help him find love, or will she risk losing her own heart in the process? Join Lily and Ethan as they navigate the chaos of love, business and family in this swoon-worthy laugh-out-loud rom-com that proves sometimes love can sneak up on you when you least expect it. Lily Hartman had seen it all: bridezilles, groomsales, the endless drama over centerpieces, and don't even get her started on the color of the napkins. As the city's go-to wedding planner, she'd become an expert in keeping calm while everyone else was losing their minds over whether the cake was the right shade of ivory. Honestly, it was enough to make anyone lose faith in love. Yet, here she was, in the middle of a crisis she hadn't been prepared for. The groom of the century had just bolted from his own wedding. And where did he run? Right into Lily's car. She had been minding her own business, sipping on a half-sweetened iced chai, and rolling her eyes at the absurdity of this latest wedding disaster when she saw him. A very stressed, very handsome man in an overpriced tuxedo, racing down the street like the world was on fire. Naturally, Lily's first instinct was to keep driving. After all, she had a full calendar of weddings to oversee, and this guy's breakdown was not her problem. But when the man jumped into her car without a second thought and slammed the door shut behind him, she knew she was in deep trouble. "I need your help," he panted, his eyes wide with panic. Lily raised an eyebrow. "Well, this is a new one. You're going to have to be more specific, buddy. My car isn't a wedding therapy office." He looked at her desperately, running a hand through his tousled hair. "Ethan Blake, you've heard of me, right? Billionaire, CEO, groom of the season, and I just ditched my own wedding." Of course, she knew who he was. Every bride in the city had a Pinterest board dedicated to him and his perfect smile, not to mention his absurdly rich family. The whole world was watching this wedding like it was the royal wedding's less royal cousin, and now the groom had skipped out. "Why are you in my car?" Lily demanded. Ethan swallowed hard. "Because I need a plan, and you're the only person who can help me." Lily shook her head, narrowing her eyes. "Oh, I don't think so. I don't know what you think this is, but I'm a wedding planner, not a runaway groom counselor. Maybe you should call your mom, or I don't know, a therapist?" Ethan's lips twisted into a grin, and Lily couldn't decide if she wanted to slap him or kiss him for that smirk. "Well, my mom's probably busy throwing herself a pity party right about now, and as for therapists, I've got enough of those in my life. What I need is someone who can help me get out of this wedding without the entire media circus tearing me apart, and someone who can make my family think I'm still going through with it." Lily crossed her arms, unconvinced. "Why me?" "Because," he said with a slight chuckle, "you're the one person who looks like she's seen it all, but still has her sanity intact." She blinked at him, considering it for a moment. "And what do you think I get out of this?" He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her stomach flip. "You help me out of this mess, and I'll help you make your dream a reality. I'll fund your own wedding planning agency. You'd be in charge. No more miserable brides or controlling mothers." Lily blinked, the offer hanging in the air. A dream agency? Her dream agency? She had worked her butt off for years, taking other people's dreams and turning them into reality, but she'd never had the resources to make her own dreams come true. This was tempting. Very tempting. Still, she wasn't going to give in that easily. "I'm not a babysitter for runaway grooms. I'm a professional. You need a plan. Hire someone else." But as Ethan looked at her, all charm and determination, Lily felt something she wasn't ready to acknowledge. She was already in way too deep, so against her better judgment, she sighed and dropped her shoulders in defeat. "Fine. You've got yourself a deal, but just so we're clear, I'm only doing this because I'm not about to watch you ruin my lunch hour. And if you try anything funny, I'm throwing you out of the car." Ethan's eyes lit up with amusement. "Don't worry. I'm all business." Lily shot him a skeptical look. "Right. Business. Let's just get one thing straight, Ethan Blake. This is a temporary arrangement. I'm not some damsel in distress waiting for you to swoop in and be my knight in shining armor. I don't do love. I do logistics. So if you're looking for a happily ever after, you've got the wrong girl. Ethan didn't say anything for a moment, just stared at her with that infuriatingly confident look on his face. And when he finally spoke, it was in that deep, knowing voice of his. Who said anything about love? Oh, she was going to regret this. Lily wasn't sure what was more absurd. The fact that she was actually sitting next to Ethan Blake, the most eligible bachelor in the city, as he plotted his escape from his own wedding, or that she was agreeing to help him do it. Her instinct screamed at her to bail, before she got any further involved. But something about his proposition kept her tethered to the situation like a moth to a flame. Maybe it was the promise of finally having the financial backing to open her own wedding agency, or maybe it was the challenge. Either way, she had just agreed to take on the role of his personal decoy fiancé, and it wasn't like she could back out now. Ethan was already mapping out their next steps with the focus of a general preparing for battle. All right, here's the deal, he said, leaning back in the seat, eyes still gleaming with that cocky, determined look. We're going to fake this whole thing. You're going to pretend to be my girlfriend, fiancé, whatever you want to call it. We'll make sure my family, the media, and everyone else believe it's real. Lily rolled her eyes. You think this is going to work? You think you can just pluck some random woman off the street and convince your family you're in love? Ethan didn't miss a beat. I've got charm, remember? I'm the one they all expect to follow the rules, so when I break them, it's gotta be believable. And you're perfect for the job. You're tough, no nonsense, and you don't get starstruck by money or status. Lily leaned forward, her arms crossed, her skepticism practically radiating off her. And what makes you think I'm going to just play along with your little charade? Ethan gave her a sheepish smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, as if he were trying to get away with something. Because Lily, I'm offering you something you've always wanted, a chance to build your dream agency. We both know you've got the talent, but the cash and resources, those don't just fall from the sky. She hesitated for a moment, her mind doing the calculations. She had been dreaming of running her own agency for years. Every wedding she planned, every contract she signed, had been a step toward that goal. But this was insanity. Helping a billionaire escape a wedding wasn't exactly on her list of things to do before she turned 30. Fine, she muttered, barely believing she was about to say it out loud. I'll help, but I'm not your lapdog, Blake. You want a fake fiancé, you treat it like a professional arrangement, or I'm out. Ethan grinned, that damn smirk creeping onto his face again. Of course, all business. I respect that. Lily scowled at him. Yeah, just know I'm only doing this for me, not for you. And if this whole charade goes south, I'm out. I've got my reputation to protect. Understood, he said, holding up his hands in mock surrender. But just so we're clear, we'll need to take it a step further. We need photos, public appearances, your best we're so in love act. No one can suspect a thing. Lily felt her stomach churn at the thought. She could handle the logistics, the planning, the execution, but pretending to be in love with Ethan Blake. The guy was infuriatingly perfect in every way, and every time he smiled at her, it made her feel like she was about to lose her mind. Not that she cared. Of course, she didn't do love. Not anymore. So why was her heart rate increasing every time he said something remotely charming? She ignored the flutter in her chest, as she narrowed her eyes at him. You really think this is going to work? She asked, voice dripping with disbelief. Ethan's grin never faltered, and if anything, it grew wider. Oh, it's going to work. You'll see. It's just a matter of making everyone believe in us. And believe me, Lily, if there's one thing I'm good at, it's making people believe. Well, lucky for you, I'm good at making people believe in fake wedding plans. She sighed dramatically, and pushed a stray lock of hair out of her face, trying to ignore the sinking feeling in her stomach. So what's the first step? Ethan's eyes gleamed. First, we need to create the perfect story. I need you to meet my family. Start weaving the narrative that we're madly in love. And, wait, what? Meet your family? Lily's eyebrows shot up in shock. I'm not signing up for Thanksgiving dinner with your mom and dad, Blake. Oh, don't worry. You won't be there for the awkward holiday meals. Ethan chuckled. But you'll meet them sooner than you think. And trust me, you'll be great at this. You've got the whole tough but vulnerable vibe down perfectly. Lily narrowed her eyes. I don't know if I should be flattered or terrified right now. Ethan leaned closer, his voice lowering to a conspiratorial whisper. Definitely both. The moment Lily stepped into the Blake mansion, she felt like a deer caught in headlights, except the headlights were 50 different people, who seemed to have come straight out of some high society magazine, all dressed in designer clothes, and all staring at her like she was the last piece of filet mignon at a 5-star restaurant. Ethan had been adamant about the family meeting, which was apparently code for a "we're going to put you through the ultimate relationship audition test." Lily had expected a tense, awkward dinner, but what she got was so much worse. Ethan's mother, a tall woman with icy platinum blonde hair, and an air of superiority that screamed, "Don't touch the china," barely looked at her as she was introduced. Lily Hartman, Mrs. Blake said with a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. You're the wedding planner. Ethan's mother's gaze flicked over Lily's attire, casual chic, not a fancy suit in sight, and Lily swore she could see the judgment oozing from her pores. I didn't realize wedding planners made such an impact on the billion-dollar industry, she continued, taking a sip of her wine, as if she had just taken a bite of something distasteful. Lily resisted the urge to roll her eyes. Of course, Mrs. Blake would see wedding planning as something beneath her. After all, she was probably more concerned with the proper way to organize her linen closet than with anything resembling actual work. I like to think I'm a little more hands-on than most, Lily said, trying her best to keep the sarcasm at bay. But I'm sure your son has already filled you in on all the details. Ethan's father, a man with a thick graying beard and a permanent frown, was no better. He didn't even greet her with a handshake, just a grunt and a muttered, "Nice to meet you." The rest of the family members didn't exactly roll out the red carpet either. The room was filled with a bunch of wealthy, impeccably put-together individuals, who gave off the air of being too perfect to exist. And yet, as the night wore on, Lily couldn't help but feel that under all the glitz and glamour, these people were playing their own version of a game she wasn't prepared for. Ethan, on the other hand, seemed perfectly at ease, exchanging banter with his relatives like they were all part of the same secret club. And every time their gazes met, a part of Lily wanted to strangle him for dragging her into this mess, and another part couldn't help but notice how effortlessly handsome he looked, even while pretending to be the dutiful son. She hated how much he knew how to play the part, how much he could turn on the charm at the drop of a hat. It only made her feel more out of place. The conversation shifted to wedding plans, Ethan's wedding of course, and Lily had to choke down the bitter laugh that threatened to escape. She wasn't sure what was more ridiculous, the fact that they were discussing a wedding that was never going to happen, or the fact that they were talking about it like it was a business merger. I still can't believe you're marrying that girl, Mrs. Blake said, her voice dripping with disdain as she adjusted her diamond necklace. She's not right for you, Ethan. She doesn't understand what this family needs. Lily raised an eyebrow. So let me get this straight. You all have a say in who your son marries, but he doesn't. Ethan's mother's icy smile flickered, but she quickly recovered. We only want what's best for him. And she shot a pointed look at Lily, is clearly not up to the task. Before Lily could respond, Ethan stepped in, wrapping an arm around her waist in what was probably an attempt to make things look more believable. Actually, Mom, Lily's the perfect choice for me. You'd be surprised how well we get along. Lily stiffened, her body suddenly becoming rigid under his touch. She was supposed to be in this charade, yes, but she wasn't prepared for the intimate touch, especially when it felt way too real. The way Ethan was looking at her, the way his hand rested possessively on her hip, it was like something out of a romance novel, and that did not sit well with her. She could feel her heart rate spike, and not from anger or irritation, though she was definitely She quickly pulled away, plastering a fake smile on her face. Ethan's right, she said, her voice laced with just the right amount of sweetness. We're in love, the kind of love that doesn't need approval from anyone. Ethan's father raised an eyebrow. Love, huh? He muttered, his skepticism evident. Well, I suppose that remains to be seen, but the wedding still needs to happen. Mrs. Blake, never one to let anything go, turned to Lily. I'm sure you've already started planning. You do know how to handle the details, don't you? Lily fought the urge to snap back. Absolutely, she said, maintaining her composure. I'm just waiting for the perfect moment to start putting everything together. "We're in no rush." "Of course," Mrs. Blake said, her smile tight. "You'll want everything to be perfect. After all, this is a Blake wedding." Ethan glanced at Lily, a silent question in his eyes. She knew exactly what he was asking. "Do you think we're getting out of this without blowing our cover?" And Lily had no answer. But one thing was for sure. Getting involved with Ethan Blake was like stepping into a high-stakes game she wasn't sure she could win. The next few days were a blur of public appearances, dinners, and endless rehearsed smiles. Ethan and Lily were practically attached at the hip, pretending to be the happiest couple in the world, while secretly plotting how to escape the whole mess. Ethan was, of course, a natural at this game. He played the part of the doting fiancé like he'd been practicing for years. Every time he held her hand, or wrapped his arm around her waist, it felt like the whole world was watching. And Lily couldn't shake the discomfort of it all. She was good at managing weddings, not fake relationships. She knew how to keep her composure when people were fawning over her work. But this was a whole new level of stress. And it wasn't just the constant pretending, it was Ethan himself. He was charming, smart, and impossibly good-looking. And every time he smiled at her like he was actually enjoying this charade, her stomach did that annoying little flip that she hated so much. She reminded herself over and over again that she wasn't in this for Ethan. She was in this for her own future, her agency, her independence. But the more time she spent with him, the more difficult it became to maintain that distance. It wasn't just his looks, though those certainly didn't hurt. It was the way he listened to her, really listened. The way he seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts on the wedding industry, her dreams, her life beyond the chaos of event planning. The way he could make her laugh with the most absurd jokes, even when everything around them was falling apart. She'd sworn off love a long time ago. She had no room for it in her life, not with the way her career had become her everything. But when Ethan looked at her like that, like she was more than just a convenient business arrangement, it made it harder to keep up the walls she'd built around her heart. She kept reminding herself it was just part of the act. She was the fake fiancé, that was it. And still, every time he brushed his fingers against hers, or gazed at her like she meant something more than just a cover story, she found herself questioning everything. He was so damn convincing. One night, they were at a gala hosted by one of Ethan's business partners, surrounded by socialites, influencers, and every other person who seemed to have more money than sense. Ethan had his arm around her waist, guiding her through the crowd, like they were the picture-perfect couple. And Lily was playing her part as best as she could. But the longer they stayed, the more it became apparent that Lily wasn't the only one struggling with the act. Ethan's hand rested casually on her lower back, but every time she glanced at him, she saw something in his eyes, something that wasn't just part of the plan, and it made her question everything. At one point during the evening, they found themselves alone in a quiet corner of the venue, away from the prying eyes of the guests. Ethan turned to her, his face unreadable for a moment before a small, almost imperceptible smile tugged at the corners of his lips. "So how's the act going? Are you tired of playing pretend yet?" Lily crossed her arms, trying to look unaffected. "It's fine. It's not like I'm not used to pretending to be someone I'm not. I've been doing it for years in this business." He raised an eyebrow, clearly not buying it. "You don't seem like the type to fake anything. And you think I'm buying this whole 'I need a fake fiancé to save my company's' thing?" She shot back, her voice a little sharper than she intended. Ethan didn't flinch, just gave her that steady gaze of his, that made her stomach do ridiculous things. "Fair point, but the fake fiancé part isn't the worst part of this situation. The worst part is that I'm asking you to play this role, when I don't even know if I'm doing the right thing." Lily frowned. "What do you mean?" Ethan's expression softened for just a moment, and for the first time, Lily saw a crack in the perfect polished exterior. "I didn't plan on dragging anyone into this. I thought I could just go along with the wedding, marry the girl, keep the peace, and everything would be fine. But I realized that if I didn't do something drastic, I'd be stuck living a lie. And the more I try to keep everything together, the more it feels like I'm falling apart." His voice was low, and for a moment, Lily could almost see the vulnerability in his eyes. The same vulnerability he'd hidden behind his arrogant charm, and his well-constructed plans. It was the first time he seemed like a real person, not the perfect billionaire, with everything under control. She wasn't sure how to respond to that. Part of her wanted to tell him it wasn't her problem, that he'd made this mess, and now he had to clean it up. But another part of her understood. She understood what it was like to feel like you were trapped in a life that wasn't your own, to be expected to fit into someone else's mold, just because that's what was expected of you. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly, her tone softer than she'd intended. "You don't have to pretend with me. If this is just about the wedding, then I'm just here to help you get out of it. But if it's more than that..." She let the sentence trail off, not sure where she was going with it. Ethan stared at her for a long moment, his eyes unreadable. "It's not just about the wedding anymore," he said, finally, his voice low and steady. "It's about finding out what I really want." Lily's breath caught in her throat. What he wanted. She couldn't afford to think about that. She couldn't afford to get tangled up in this any more than she already was. But as Ethan looked at her, she couldn't help but wonder, was he talking about her, or was this just part of the game? The line between what was real and what was fake had never been blurrier. Lily had spent most of the week trying to ignore the nagging little voice in her head that kept telling her she was in deeper than she wanted to admit. It was one thing to help Ethan fake a relationship for a few weeks. She was used to pretending, after all. But this was starting to feel like something else entirely. Every time they were alone together, it was like they were two magnets pulled closer, whether they wanted to admit it or not. Ethan's charm, the easy way he'd wrap his arm around her waist in public, his mischievous grins and quiet conversations in the corners of rooms, everything about him made her heart race in ways she didn't want to analyze. She had come to the conclusion that she was just really good at faking things. She was a professional, a pro at pretending she was okay, when she wasn't, pretending she wasn't dying on the inside, as everyone else fawned over her success. But Ethan made it feel too real, and that was a problem. Way he made her laugh with his dry humor, the way his eyes lit up when he talked about his childhood memories, or how he seemed genuinely concerned about her well-being whenever she looked a little too stressed. It wasn't part of the plan. It wasn't supposed to be like this, but there was no denying the connection they shared. The spark that seemed to flicker to life every time they looked at each other. And Lily hated it, because the more time she spent with him, the more she wondered if this whole fake fiancé act was becoming something else entirely. Her thoughts were interrupted one evening, when Ethan called her in a panic. "Lily, they're making me do a family dinner, like a real one tomorrow night," he said, his voice low with frustration. "And they're going to expect us to be, well, a real couple. You ready for this?" Lily sighed, collapsing onto her couch. Oh joy, just what I needed. A family dinner with the Blakes, the royal family of impossible expectations. She could practically hear him smirking on the other end of the line. "Yeah, it's going to be fun, but we need to step it up. If we don't make them believe this is the real deal, it could blow up in my face." "I know the drill, Blake," she muttered, trying to push down the nagging unease. "But that doesn't mean I have to like it." The dinner was a disaster waiting to happen. Or at least, that's what Lily had convinced herself it would be. When she showed up at Ethan's house the next night, looking perfectly put together in a sleek black dress that was probably too fancy for the occasion, she was already bracing herself for the judgment that would surely come from his family. Ethan, of course, looked like he had just stepped out of a magazine cover, impeccably groomed, confident in a way that made Lily feel like she was just along for the ride. His mother was the first to pounce. "Lily, how wonderful to see you again," Mrs. Blake said with an over-the-top smile. "Tell me, what do you think of the house? I had it remodeled last year, but I'm still not sure I'm satisfied." Lily barely stopped herself from rolling her eyes. "It's beautiful," she said, smiling politely. "You clearly have a knack for design." Ethan's mom barely acknowledged the compliment. "Good to hear. Now I'm curious. What is it that Ethan sees in you, exactly? He's always had such high standards, you know." Lily stiffened, her polite smile turning brittle. "Well, I suppose he likes someone who's down to earth.
Not everyone needs to come from old money to be valuable, right? She glanced at Ethan, expecting to see a look of surprise or annoyance, but he was, as always, smooth as silk. He gave her a nod, a subtle signal that he was backing her up. Exactly, he said, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. Lily's the real deal. But it wasn't just his mother. Ethan's father had something to say too. And that something was less than pleasant. Over dinner he barely glanced in her direction. His eyes focused more on Ethan than anything else. "Ethan," he began, his tone cold. "Are you sure this is what you want? You don't need to rush into anything. You've got time to figure this out." Lily bristled at the implication, but before she could say anything, Ethan interjected smoothly. "We're both sure this is what we want." His eyes flicked toward Lily, and she saw that familiar glimmer in his gaze, the one that made her heart skip. She was supposed to be playing the part, but suddenly, it felt like there was so much more on the line. The night wore on, the tension growing thicker with every passing minute. Ethan's family was polite, but distant, and Lily couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't just playing a role, she was under a microscope. Everything she said, everything she did, was being analyzed, dissected and picked apart. She didn't just have to impress Ethan, she had to impress his family too, all while keeping up the charade that they were madly in love. As the evening drew to a close, and they were preparing to leave, Mrs. Blake cornered her. "I'll be honest, Lily," she said, her voice quieter than usual. "I'm still not convinced you're the right match for my son, but I suppose time will tell." Lily stiffened, but she managed a smile that was more polite than warm. "Of course, Mrs. Blake. I'm sure you'll come around." Ethan's gaze lingered on her as they walked out the door. And once they were in the privacy of his car, he exhaled deeply. "That went better than I thought," he said, though his voice was laced with tension. "You did great." But as Lily sat next to him, her mind spinning, she couldn't ignore the way her chest tightened at his words. Did she really do great? Or was she just convincing herself that she was? Because deep down, she wasn't sure how much longer she could keep pretending. The next few days passed in a blur of increasingly uncomfortable situations that Lily was starting to dread more than anything else. The family dinner had been a test, but it was only the beginning. Now, it was the media that was watching. The relentless photographers who snapped pictures every time she and Ethan ventured out into public. The engagement had become a hot topic, and the stories about the billionaire groom and his wedding planner fiancé were everywhere, each headline more absurd than the last. Some speculated that their romance was a last-minute attempt to salvage his reputation, while others believed it was a business move. And Lily, well, she was just trying to survive the whole thing without losing her mind. Every time she looked at Ethan, she was reminded of why this wasn't supposed to be real. He was handsome, charming, and easy to fall for. Hell, she'd been falling for him in small, annoying ways she couldn't control. But the more they played the part of the perfect couple, the more she saw cracks in the facade. It wasn't the big gestures. Those were easy enough to fake. It was the small things. The way his hand would brush against hers when they were waiting for the elevator. The way he'd catch her eye across a crowded room and give her that slight, knowing smile, as if they were in on a secret no one else could understand. Those little moments felt too real. And it terrified her. On the surface, everything was going perfectly. Ethan's family was starting to warm up to her, albeit in that cold, high society way that made Lily want to scream. His mother had even started to offer her advice on wedding dresses and event planning, though it felt more like a subtle attempt to control every little detail of the wedding rather than genuine interest. The media, meanwhile, ate it up, running stories about how the unlikely couple was proving that love could bloom in the most unexpected of places. But every time she read one of those articles, Lily's stomach churned. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. And yet, there were moments fleeting and infuriating, when she caught herself wishing it was. Ethan, for all his confidence and charm, was showing sides of himself she hadn't expected, vulnerable moments that no one would ever see on the front page of a magazine. He talked about his childhood, his fears about living up to his family's expectations,
and his deep, almost desperate desire to prove himself outside of his last name. And in those moments, when it was just the two of them, Lily almost forgot they were pretending. Almost. One afternoon, while they were taking a break from all the media madness at one of Ethan's favorite cafes, they found themselves alone, the noise of the city fading into the background. They were sitting across from each other at a small table, cups of coffee between them, neither of them saying anything for a moment. Ethan was the first to break the silence. "You know you're really good at this," he said, his voice low, almost thoughtful. Lily raised an eyebrow. "At what?" "Pretending. At making everyone believe it," he said, with a smirk, though his eyes were serious. "I can't tell if I'm impressed or terrified by how convincing you are." "It's my job," Lily said, her tone sharp as she took a sip of her coffee. "I've been faking my way through weddings for years, but it's a lot easier when the people you're fooling aren't constantly trying to analyze every little thing you do." "Tell me about it," Ethan muttered, glancing down at his coffee cup. "But you're handling it better than I am. I'm starting to think that maybe I'm in over my head with all of this." Lily's heart skipped, and she immediately regretted the way the words felt too personal. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice quieter than she intended. Ethan looked up at her, his gaze intense and unreadable. "I didn't think I'd get this invested." He paused, his jaw tightening. "The more we do this, the more I feel like I'm not just pretending, and that's dangerous." Lily's breath caught in her throat. There it was, the thing she had been trying to avoid, the reality creeping in. She couldn't allow herself to think like that. She couldn't let herself believe that this fake engagement was something real, something more than just a means to an end. "You're not the only one playing a role here," she said, her voice cold. "We both are, and as soon as this is over, we go back to our separate lives. This isn't anything more than a business arrangement. Got it?" Ethan's eyes darkened slightly, but he didn't say anything for a moment. The tension between them hung thick in the air, like a storm that was just waiting to break. Finally he nodded, though it seemed like there was a little less conviction in it than before. "Right. No strings attached." But Lily couldn't shake the feeling that there were already strings, tiny invisible threads that were slowly weaving them together, thread by thread. And the more she tried to deny it, the more she felt herself falling into the very trap she had sworn she would avoid. The line between what was real and what was fake was getting blurrier every day, and Lily wasn't sure how much longer she could keep pretending. The weekend arrived with a sense of inevitability that Lily couldn't shake, the kind that sat heavy on her chest, like she knew something was about to happen but couldn't quite figure out what. She'd spent the last few days trying to avoid Ethan, keeping herself busy with wedding planning and dodging the constant stream of phone calls and text messages from him, though she couldn't help but notice that the frequency was increasing. She'd told herself that this was just part of the game. He was the billionaire groom in need of a cover story, and she was the no-nonsense wedding planner doing him a favor. Nothing more, nothing personal. At least that's what she kept telling herself. But then came the invite. A last-minute gala, thrown by one of Ethan's business associates, a big one, the kind that was practically crawling with A-list celebrities, power players, and more money than anyone could realistically count. Of course, Lily's first instinct was to turn it down. She didn't need another reminder that she wasn't part of that world. But when Ethan showed up at her door an hour before the event, looking ridiculously good in a tuxedo that probably cost more than her rent for a year, her resistance crumbled. "You're going," he said, his tone not asking, but commanding, as he handed her a dress bag that practically screamed designer. "This is part of the deal. The world is watching us. We need to show them we're serious about this whole engagement." Lily wasn't sure if she hated him, or wanted to strangle him, but she found herself dressing in the dress he'd picked out for her, slipping into a world she wasn't sure she belonged in. She could see the flashes of cameras already as they walked out of the building and into the sleek black car that would take them to the event. She hated the attention, the constant reminder that this wasn't real, that it never would be. The night itself was a blur of fancy cocktails, extravagant decorations, and polite, insipid conversations with people who only cared about the names behind the brand, not the person standing in front of them. But the worst part was Ethan. As the night wore on,
and they found themselves surrounded by a sea of polished smiles and empty pleasantries. Lily realized something she hadn't wanted to admit. He was good at this. He was so damn good at it. He was charming, engaging, and seemed to be enjoying every second of it. And what was worse, the longer they stood there in the center of the room, the more she felt herself slipping. There was a small part of her that wanted to be seen with him, to be part of this world, to be the one by his side. It was ridiculous. He was just playing a part. She was just playing a part. But as he caught her gaze across the room, his smile warm and easy, something inside her flipped. She reminded herself that it was all a game, that she couldn't let her guard down. Not now. But Ethan seemed to be making it harder to keep that distance. As the night drew to a close, and they found themselves alone for just a moment, Ethan turned to her, his expression unreadable. "You know," he began, his voice low, almost thoughtful, "I'm starting to wonder if we're fooling anyone at all." Lily furrowed her brows. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice sharp. "I mean we're supposed to be faking this whole thing, right? But the more I'm with you, the harder it is to pretend." His eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time, Lily saw something in them that wasn't just calculation or charm, it was something real. "I don't know what I'm doing anymore, Lily," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "I don't know if this is still about the wedding, about my family, or if it's something more. I just know I don't want this to end." The words hit her like a punch to the gut, and she felt herself reel from the sheer honesty in them. She knew what he was asking. She knew he was starting to feel something for her, something that wasn't part of the plan, and that terrified her. "Ethan," she began, trying to keep her voice steady. "This isn't real. We're not real. This is just a distraction, okay? We're both just trying to get through this mess, and when it's over, we go back to our lives. No harm, no foul." He looked at her, his jaw tightening, but he didn't say anything for a long time. The silence between them felt thick with tension, and Lily couldn't breathe. Finally, Ethan stepped closer, his voice almost a growl. "I'm not buying that, Lily. I'm not buying that you don't feel this. Whatever this is between us, it's not just for show." She opened her mouth to protest, to remind him that this was all just smoke and mirrors, but before she could say anything, he cut her off. "Stop pretending it's not real. Stop pretending you don't feel it too." His face was mere inches from hers, and Lily could feel the heat of his breath on her skin. Everything inside her screamed to pull away, to remind herself why this wasn't supposed to happen. But for the first time since all of this began, she didn't know what to say. The truth was, she didn't want to pull away. The truth was, she was already in deeper than she ever thought possible. And now she wasn't sure she could ever escape. Lily spent the next few days avoiding Ethan as much as possible, but the universe seemed intent on throwing them together at every turn. No matter how many excuses she made, no matter how many times she reminded herself that this wasn't real, fate had other plans. It was like the universe knew exactly how to push all her buttons. Every time they were in the same room, she could feel the tension crackling between them, as if the invisible barrier between them, the one she'd spent so much energy building, was starting to erode. The more she tried to deny the undeniable, the harder it became to ignore the pull between them. She'd convinced herself she was doing just fine, that she could keep her feelings under control. After all, they were both playing a part in this charade, and in the end it was all for the wedding, his wedding to another woman. But the more she watched Ethan, the more she saw him in a light that had nothing to do with the role he was playing for his family and the media. She saw the real Ethan, vulnerable, kind, and so unbelievably conflicted that it made her heart ache in a way she didn't want to acknowledge. He had his flaws, his moments of uncertainty, and yet she found herself drawn to him in a way that made no sense. And worse, she could feel it, the way he was being drawn to her too. It wasn't just the performances they were putting on for his family, the public, or the press. It was something else. Every stolen glance, every quiet moment they shared, seemed to build an invisible thread between them, pulling them closer, despite their best efforts. She tried to keep her distance, reminding herself that they were both pretending, but the line between pretense and reality was blurring faster than she could keep up with. It all came to a head one evening, when Ethan showed up at her apartment unannounced. Lily had just finished a long day of meetings, and was curled up on the couch, trying to decompress when the knock at the door jolted her out of her thoughts. When she opened it, there he was, standing in the doorway, his jaw clenched, his eyes intense. "We need to talk," he said, his voice tight with something that she couldn't quite place. Before she could protest, he stepped inside, closing the door behind him with more force than necessary. "Ethan, what are you doing here?" she asked, trying to keep her tone neutral, though her heart was already racing. "I can't keep doing this, Lily," he said, his eyes searching hers as if looking for an answer he didn't have. "I can't keep pretending with you. I've been trying to convince myself that this is all just an act, but the truth is, I can't stop thinking about you. I don't want to be with anyone else. I don't want to go through with the wedding. I want you." Lily felt her breath catch in her throat. The words he was saying, the ones she'd been trying to avoid for so long, were out in the open now. She could feel the weight of them, the gravity of the situation pressing down on her chest. Her instinct screamed at her to push him away, to tell him this was a terrible idea, to remind him of the mess they were in. But the way he was looking at her, like she was the only person in the world, made it harder to fight that urge. "You don't know what you're saying," she whispered, though her voice trembled. "This is a mistake. You're about to marry someone else. This whole thing, this fake engagement, it's all just smoke and mirrors. We can't keep going down this path." But Ethan wasn't backing down. He took a step forward, his hand reaching out to gently brush a strand of hair behind her ear. "I don't care about the wedding anymore," he said, his voice low, almost desperate. "I care about you, and I know this is crazy, but I can't keep pretending. I know I've been telling myself it's just for the wedding, just for the family, but when I'm with you, it's more than that. I can't keep ignoring it." Lily's heart raced as his words settled in, each one breaking down another piece of the wall she'd spent so long building between them. "Ethan," she didn't know what to say. She didn't know how to react. This wasn't part of the plan. She had spent so long keeping her emotions in check, pushing everything down so she could keep up the charade for his sake, and for her own future. But now, standing in front of him, with the truth hanging in the air between them, it felt like there was no turning back. She had to make a decision. "Lily, I know this is complicated," Ethan said, his voice cracking slightly as if he were trying to hold on to whatever composure he had left. "But I can't keep pretending that what we have is nothing. I want you. No more games. No more pretending." Her pulse pounded in her ears as she met his gaze, the depth of his words settling in her chest like a heavy weight. She had always been the practical one, the one who could keep her emotions in check, the one who was always in control. But in that moment, all the walls she'd built came crashing down, and for the first time, she realized she didn't want to be the one in control anymore. She didn't want to keep pretending. She wanted him, but she couldn't let herself go down this road, not without knowing how it would end. "Ethan," she said softly, taking a step back, her voice trembling, "I need you to be sure. I need you to be sure that this what you're feeling is real, because I can't keep doing this if it's just part of the plan." Ethan's expression softened, and for a moment she saw the real vulnerability behind the mask he'd been wearing for so long. "I'm sure," he said quietly, taking another step toward her. "I'm sure, Lily. I've never been more sure of anything in my life." And just like that, she realized she was at the point of no return. There was no turning back. The next few days passed in a haze of confusion and indecision, each passing moment pulling Lily further into the whirlwind she had sworn to avoid. The walls she'd so carefully built up around her heart were starting to crumble, and with every passing second, it felt like she was losing control. Ethan had been nothing but sincere when he'd confessed that he wanted her, and the more she thought about it, the more she realized that the connection between them had never been just for the sake of a fake engagement. It was real. It was terrifying, but it was real, and that was the problem. She had spent years burying any thoughts of love beneath the weight of her career, telling herself that her future was about securing her dream agency, about doing things on her terms. But now, standing at the crossroads between love and practicality, she didn't know which direction to take. Ethan was everything she'd told herself she didn't need. He was rich, powerful, and everything that came with that lifestyle: expectations, obligations, and a future that seemed preordained. He was not a man she could easily fit into her carefully planned life, And yet, every time she was with him, every time his eyes met hers with that intensity, it was as if nothing else in the world mattered. She had always prided herself on being level-headed, on keeping her emotions in check, but now she was starting to question everything she'd ever believed about herself. The decision she had to make weighed heavily on her, and as much as she wanted to convince herself that she could walk away, that she could keep things professional and focused on her future, there was a part of her that didn't want to. The worst part was that Ethan wasn't just a distraction anymore. He was someone she found herself thinking about when she woke up in the morning, and when she went to bed at night. He was the first thought on her mind, and that terrified her. So when he showed up at her door again, unannounced, looking more determined than ever, Lily knew there was no avoiding it. She opened the door, her heart pounding, and found him standing there as usual, impeccably dressed but with a look on his face that told her he wasn't here for a casual chat. "Lily," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion, "I've been thinking a lot about everything, the wedding, the family, all of it. I know this has been a mess from the start, but I can't keep pretending that I don't want more. I want you, I want this. No more games, no more pretending we're just playing a role. This is real, and I need you to see that." Lily opened her mouth to speak, but the words got stuck in her throat. She couldn't say the words she needed to say. She couldn't tell him that she was scared of losing herself in him, of giving up everything she had worked for. She couldn't admit that she felt the same way. That was the thing that terrified her the most. "Ethan, this isn't just about you and me," she said, her voice breaking as she spoke. "This is about everything I've worked for. I've spent so long building my career, making sure I had control over my life. I can't just give that up." Ethan stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers, his hand gently reaching out to brush her cheek in a way that made her heart race. "I'm not asking you to give anything up," he said softly. "I'm asking you to take a chance on something real. I'm asking you to trust that this isn't just some fleeting moment. I know it's complicated. I know you have your fears. But I'm not asking you to walk away from everything you've worked for. I'm asking you to walk into something new, something that's yours, something that's ours. We don't have to do it the way everyone expects. We can do it our way." Lily stared at him, her mind spinning. And for a moment she wished everything could just be simple. But it wasn't. It was messy and complicated. And every decision she made felt like it would change everything. But Ethan's words hit her in a way that she couldn't ignore. He wasn't asking her to give up her dreams. He was asking her to make room for him in them. And the truth was, for the first time in years, she wasn't sure she could live without him. She took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest as she looked at him. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," she admitted, her voice soft and shaky. "I don't know if I'm ready to let someone in." Ethan's face softened, and he gently cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing across her cheeks in a gesture that felt too intimate, too real. "You don't have to be ready, Lily," he whispered. "You just have to trust me. Trust us. We'll figure it out together." And in that moment, Lily realized that there was no more pretending, no more running from the truth. She had already fallen, whether she was ready to admit it or not. The only question now was whether she could take that leap with him, into the unknown, into something neither of them could control. And as Ethan leaned in, his lips just inches from hers, she knew that there was no turning back. Lily had always considered herself a planner, a strategist, someone who mapped out every detail and anticipated every possible outcome. So, when it came to matters of the heart, she'd been quick to build walls that were high and sturdy, designed to keep out anything that might threaten the order she had so carefully constructed. But with every moment spent with Ethan, every stolen glance, every word spoken in the quiet spaces between the noise of their lives, those walls had started to crack. And now, standing in his arms, her heart pounding in her chest as she stared into his eyes, Lily realized that she could no longer pretend. She had tried to distance herself, tried to convince herself that this was just another act, another role to play until the wedding was over and they could both go back to their separate lives. But that had been before Ethan had looked at her with such intensity, before he had opened up to her in ways no one ever had, before she had allowed herself to want him. She had always thought that love was something that happened to other people, the kind of thing that you saw in movies or read about in books, but never something you allowed yourself to feel. She had made herself believe that her future was about building her career, about turning her dreams into reality. But now, standing on the precipice of something new, something terrifyingly real, she couldn't ignore the truth any longer. Ethan wasn't just some billionaire with a family legacy to uphold. He was someone who had seen her, really seen her, and had made her feel like she was worth something beyond her job, beyond the perfect wedding plans and the shiny, perfectly curated life she had built for herself.
And in that moment, as his lips brushed against hers in a kiss that was nothing like the fake ones they'd shared for the cameras or his family, Lily realized that maybe, just maybe, she was ready to take the leap. She wasn't ready to give up her dreams, but she wasn't ready to give up on love either. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't planned, and it definitely wasn't easy, but it was real. And that was enough. When they finally pulled away, their breaths ragged and hearts racing, Ethan's eyes held a softness that made Lily's heart skip. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Because once we take this step, there's no going back." Lily swallowed, her mind racing with the enormity of the choice she was making. She had spent so long building her career, carving out a space for herself in a world that often overlooked her, that the idea of letting someone else in, of giving them a piece of her heart, had always felt like a risk. But now, staring into Ethan's eyes, she realized that it wasn't a risk. It was a chance at something she had never allowed herself to believe was possible. "I'm sure," she said, her voice steady as she reached up to pull him closer, her hands resting on his chest. "Let's take it together." And just like that, with those simple words, she took the leap. She let herself fall, fully and completely, into whatever this was with Ethan, knowing that it might not be easy, that they might face obstacles, and that they could fall apart. But for the first time in her life, Lily was ready to face it all, because for once, she wasn't doing it alone. She was doing it with him, and that was enough. In the days following their decision to move forward together, it felt like everything around them shifted, both in the most wonderful and the most terrifying ways. For the first time in what felt like forever, Lily was truly excited about something that wasn't part of a carefully constructed plan. Being with Ethan, being real with Ethan, was everything she had told herself she didn't need. And yet, it was everything she had unknowingly longed for. But the euphoria of their decision came with a wave of uncertainty she hadn't expected. The fake engagement that had initially been nothing more than a strategic move now seemed to have real consequences. His family wasn't thrilled with the sudden change of direction, especially after months of carefully orchestrated appearances. His mother, ever the perfectionist, had been nothing short of icy in their recent interactions, and his father's disapproval was palpable, though Ethan did his best to shield her from it. Lily couldn't help but feel the weight of their expectations, the relentless pressure of being thrust into a world she wasn't sure she belonged to. But it wasn't just the Blake family that made things complicated. The press, always eager to sensationalize any new development, picked up on their relationship with a vengeance. The media, who had once been captivated by the billionaire groom's high society wedding plans, now seemed fascinated by the idea of Ethan and Lily as a couple, offering their own interpretations of their every interaction. The constant flashes of cameras, the invasive questions, and the public scrutiny began to wear on her. She had always prided herself on being able to navigate the chaos of weddings, but this was a different kind of storm. What was once a fake story to cover up a wedding had somehow become a very real relationship under the watchful eye of the public. And then there was the growing realization that her feelings for Ethan weren't just a fleeting attraction, they were something much deeper, something she didn't know how to handle. The more she allowed herself to fall for him, the more she feared what would happen if it all came crashing down. She couldn't deny the way he made her feel, how every smile, every touch, every laugh with him felt like the world was falling into place. But what if this wasn't real for him? What if, like the wedding, he was just going through the motions because it was expected of him? And what if he woke up one day and realized that their love story wasn't a happy ending, but just another mistake in a long line of things that didn't fit his perfect life? As much as she tried to push those thoughts away, they lingered, gnawing at her every time Ethan looked at her like she was the only person in the room. They had crossed the line from pretend to real, and now they had to figure out what it meant to be together in a world that expected perfection. But amid the storm of outside pressures, there were moments, quiet, tender moments, that grounded Lily in a way she didn't expect. The way Ethan would look at her when he thought no one else was watching, the way he made her feel like she was seen, not as the wedding planner or the girlfriend, but as her. And in those moments, she knew that whatever the future held, they had something worth fighting for. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that the storm wasn't over, it had only just begun. The real question now was whether they could weather it together, or if the pressures of love, family, and fame would tear them apart before they could even begin to see what lay on the other side. Just when Lily thought things were starting to settle into a new rhythm, the universe, it seemed, had other plans. What had begun as a beautiful, albeit complicated, romance between her and Ethan suddenly spiraled into a chaotic whirlwind. It all started with a conversation at one of the Blake family's lavish parties, a party that had already stretched Lily's nerves thin with the prying eyes and endless strained smiles. Ethan's father, ever the traditionalist, had cornered her, his disapproval practically radiating off him like a palpable force. "Lily," he began, his tone cool but not unkind, "I know you've been working hard on your career, but the reality is, a man like Ethan doesn't need to be burdened with someone whose future is so uncertain." Lily's heart sank. She had expected the judgment, the subtle jabs about her lack of high society pedigree, but hearing it out loud, especially from someone like his father, hit her harder than she anticipated. "If you really want to be part of this family, you need to prove yourself. Ethan can't afford distractions. He's too important for anything less than total commitment." The words stung, but what stung more was the underlying message. No matter how much she and Ethan felt like they were on the same page to his family, she was still an outsider. As much as she hated to admit it, Ethan's family's expectations weighed heavily on her, and she found herself questioning whether she could ever really fit into their world. She could tell Ethan was struggling with it too. The evening that followed their conversation felt different, colder. His usually relaxed demeanor was replaced by a quiet tension. She could tell he was preoccupied, not meeting her gaze the way he usually did. And when they returned to his place, after an awkward silence had settled between them during the drive, she couldn't hold it in anymore. "Ethan, what happened tonight?" she asked, her voice tight with concern. He stopped pacing for a moment, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "What do you mean?" he asked, though it was clear he knew exactly what she was talking about. "Your dad," she said softly. "He made it clear, I don't belong here, and honestly, Ethan, I don't know if I can keep doing this. I don't know how to keep pretending to fit into a world that doesn't want me in it." Ethan's eyes softened, but there was something else in them now. Something that told her he was caught between two worlds. "Lily," he said, stepping closer to her, "I never meant for you to feel like an outsider. You've always belonged with me, but I don't know how to fix this. My family, they don't understand. They don't see you the way I do." The words stung, but they weren't the words that hurt the most. What really hurt was the uncertainty in his voice, the way he sounded as though he was torn between the woman he loved and the family he was expected to honor. That was the moment Lily realized that the weight of this situation had never been just hers to carry. It was Ethan's too. But that didn't make it any easier to carry. As she tried to process everything, the doorbell rang, pulling them both out of the heavy silence. It was a delivery, flowers, a small card attached. When Lily opened it, she froze. The card read simply, "This isn't over. You can't run from your responsibilities. I won't let you." There it was, the final blow. The reminder that no matter how much she and Ethan wanted to escape into something real, the pressure was always going to be there. The expectations, the obligations, they weren't just his, they were hers now too. The weight of that reality settled heavily on Lily's shoulders. She had been so focused on building her career, on making sure she could stand on her own, that she hadn't realized how much this relationship would ask of her. And now, as she looked at Ethan, his face lined with concern, she wasn't sure if she was ready for the storm that was about to hit them both. Would she be able to keep fighting for them, for what they had? Or would the world, with its unrelenting expectations, tear them apart before they ever had a chance to truly begin? The doubt lingered in the air, thick and suffocating, and for the first time in their journey together, Lily wasn't sure what came next. The next few days felt like they were caught in a constant spiral, each moment leading Lily further down a path she wasn't sure she could navigate. The delivery of that cryptic message was just the beginning. The pressure from Ethan's family had ramped up, each encounter leaving her feeling more like a pawn in a game she didn't want to be part of. She could see it in his eyes, the conflict, the guilt. He didn't want to disappoint his family, but at the same time, he couldn't bear the thought of losing her. And that was the problem. She could feel herself slipping, the walls she'd worked so hard to maintain slowly crumbling. But with every step forward they took, the reality of their situation became clearer. No matter how much they tried to fight it, they were both tangled in a web of expectations and obligations that neither of them could easily escape. Ethan had invited her to another one of his family events, but this time, Lily wasn't sure if she could handle it. She had never been the kind of person who sought approval from anyone, let alone a family who saw her as an outsider. But it had gotten to the point where every smile, every glance from his family felt like a judgment. They were waiting for her to falter, to prove them right, and she was starting to feel like she was on the verge of breaking. It was at that event, another cold, glitzy gala filled with people she barely knew, that Lily realized just how far gone they were. Ethan's father had cornered her once again, his tone dripping with condescension, as he mentioned that perhaps it was time to start thinking about the future, and that she couldn't keep living in this dream of a perfect love story. The words hit her like a slap to the face. She had heard it all before, the subtle insinuations, the sharp critiques, but this time it was different. The weight of his disapproval, the knowing look in his eyes, as if he already knew what was coming, broke her. She could feel the cracks forming in her resolve, and for the first time she realized just how alone she felt in this world that Ethan had brought her into. Ethan, for all his charm, and his words of reassurance, couldn't protect her from this. He couldn't shield her from the judgment of the people who mattered most in his life. And as the night wore on, with laughter echoing around them and cameras flashing in their direction, Lily felt more and more like a fraud. She wasn't part of this world. She wasn't part of the perfect family, the perfect life. And worse, she wasn't sure she could be. When they finally found a quiet moment together, away from the prying eyes and endless questions, Lily couldn't hold it in anymore. She turned to him, her heart aching with frustration and confusion. "Ethan, I can't keep doing this," she said, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to stay composed. "I can't keep pretending like this is something it's not. Your family, they don't see me. They don't want me here. And no matter how many times you try to tell me it'll be okay, it's not. I'm not your perfect match. I'm not what they want. And I'm starting to feel like I'm losing myself trying to be something I'm not." Ethan's face fell, his hand reaching for hers as if to hold her together. But Lily couldn't bring herself to lean into his touch. "You are my perfect match," he said, his voice low, almost desperate. "I don't care about what they think, but I can't keep watching you crumble under the pressure, watching you doubt yourself because of them." His words were meant to soothe, but they only made her feel more exposed. She had spent so long building her life, carving out her identity, and now it felt like it was all slipping away. She had tried so hard to convince herself that she could handle this, that she could navigate the chaos of their relationship, but with every passing day, the weight of it all was crushing her. "Maybe that's the problem," she whispered, pulling her hand away from his. "You think you're enough to make this work, and maybe you are, but I don't think I am. I don't think I'm enough to survive in this world with you, Ethan. I thought I could, but I can't. I can't lose myself for you. I can't keep pretending to be someone I'm not, someone I was never meant to be." Ethan looked at her, his expression unreadable for a moment before something flickered in his eyes, a mixture of pain and understanding. "Lily," he said, his voice strained, "you're not losing yourself. You're not becoming someone else. You're becoming who you're supposed to be. Someone who's allowed to be loved, to be seen, to be part of this with me. This doesn't have to be a choice between you and me. It's not about choosing them over us, or my world over yours. It's about us finding a way through it together." But Lily didn't know how to believe that anymore.
She didn't know how to believe in a future where she was willing to keep sacrificing her sense of self for something that felt so uncertain. She had spent so much of her life building walls to protect herself from getting hurt. And now, standing at the edge of the life she had been too afraid to truly live, she wasn't sure if she could jump. "I don't know if I can do this anymore, Ethan," she whispered, her heart breaking with the finality of the words. "I don't know if I'm strong enough to fight this fight." And just like that, the foundation they had built together seemed to crack beneath them. The silence between them felt suffocating, like a heavy blanket pressing down on Lily's chest, as she tried to catch her breath, to make sense of the whirlwind that had just exploded between them. Ethan stood there, his expression torn, as though he wanted to reach out and pull her back from the edge, but he was just as lost in the chaos of their situation as she was. For the first time since they'd started this complicated dance, Lily didn't know what to say. She had spent so much time convincing herself that she could handle it all, that she could be the perfect fiancée to a billionaire, that she could navigate the waters of a family who saw her as nothing more than an obstacle. But now, standing in front of Ethan, she realized that she had been lying to herself all along. The weight of their world, his world, was too much for her. She had never been a stranger to hard work, to pushing through obstacles, and carving out her own space. But this wasn't something she could control. She couldn't shape it to fit her, no matter how much she tried. Ethan's hand was still outstretched, like he was waiting for her to come back to him, to find her way back to him. But the distance between them felt so much wider than the physical space between them. "Lily," he said, his voice hoarse, barely above a whisper. "Please, don't say that. I know this is hard. I know it's not easy, but we can figure this out. We can figure out a way through it." The words were meant to soothe, to pull her back, but they only made her feel more isolated. She didn't know if she could keep doing this. She didn't know if she could keep fighting for something that felt like it was slipping away from her no matter how hard she tried. The walls she'd built up, walls that had been so sturdy, so secure, were cracking, and with every second, she could feel them crumbling down. The worst part was, it wasn't just about him. It wasn't just about his family or the impossible expectations that had been placed on her. It was about her. It was about her fear of losing herself, of losing the very thing she had spent years building. The truth was, she didn't know how to balance this life with the one she had fought so hard to create. "I don't know how to fit into this world, Ethan," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't know if I can be the person you need me to be." The pain in her voice was raw, unfiltered. And as Ethan's eyes searched hers, she saw the heartbreak in his own. "You don't have to be anyone but yourself," he said softly, his hand reaching out again, this time with more hesitation. "I never wanted you to be anyone else. I want you, Lily. I've always wanted you." She wanted to believe him. God, how badly she wanted to believe him. But the doubts that had been gnawing at her, the fears that she wasn't enough, that their worlds were too far apart, were louder than any of his reassurances. She felt like she was standing on the edge of something she couldn't name, something that was terrifying and beautiful all at once, and she wasn't sure if she had the strength to take that leap. "I don't know if I can keep going like this," she said, her voice barely a whisper, as if speaking any louder would make the truth too real. "I don't know if I'm strong enough to keep pretending I can fit into this life. I'm not like them, Ethan. I don't know if I can be who they want me to be." Ethan's face softened, and he stepped closer, his fingers brushing against her cheek. "Lily," he said, gently, his voice full of raw emotion, "you're not meant to be anyone else. You're meant to be you. I don't want perfection. I want you, all of you." Her heart ached at his words, but the ache was not enough to drown out the fear that had taken root in her chest. She had spent so long hiding behind her work, behind the walls she had carefully built, and now, with everything laid bare, she didn't know if she could let herself fall. Not like this, not when it felt like everything, her career, her identity, her future, was at risk. As she looked into Ethan's eyes, the weight of everything they had been through, everything they had fought for, felt like it was collapsing around her. She wasn't sure how to keep moving forward, wasn't sure if she was strong enough to face the storm that was only just beginning. And in that moment, with the storm raging around them, and the quiet echo of her own fears filling the space between them, Lily didn't know what came next. She didn't know if there was a way to hold on to both the person she was, and the person Ethan wanted her to be. But one thing was clear, something was going to give. And when it did, she didn't know if they would both survive the fallout. Lily spent the next few days in a haze, unable to shake the weight of the decision that had been hanging over her head for far too long. The distance between her and Ethan felt like a chasm that no words could bridge, no amount of comforting gestures could heal. Every time she tried to process her emotions, she found herself spiraling, torn between the life she had fought so hard to create, and the man who had come into her world and made her question everything. She had never wanted to lose herself in someone else. She had spent years building her identity, her independence, her career. She had built walls so high to protect herself from getting hurt, that the idea of letting them down for someone else, for Ethan, felt like an impossible task. But it wasn't just the pressure from his family or the public scrutiny that weighed on her. It was the nagging doubt that no matter how much she loved him, no matter how real their connection felt, their worlds were still too different. She wasn't sure she could keep living in the constant shadow of expectation and obligation. Ethan had been there, trying to reassure her, trying to make her believe that they could find a way through the chaos. But every time he spoke, every time he touched her, it felt like the weight of their reality was too much for her to bear. It was on one of those sleepless nights, with the city's lights flickering through her window and the cold, empty space between them growing wider, that Lily finally made a choice. She had to leave. Not because she didn't love him, God, that was the hardest part, but because she couldn't live in a world where she was constantly trying to be someone she wasn't. She couldn't be the perfect fiancée to someone who had a life so far out of reach. She needed to find herself again, to rebuild the walls that had cracked and broken over the past few months. She couldn't keep sacrificing herself for a love that was never meant to fit into her carefully crafted world. The next morning, she woke up to find Ethan still asleep beside her, his face peaceful in a way that made her heart ache. For a moment she hesitated, wondering if she could simply stay, if she could let herself fall into the life he offered her. But deep down, she knew she couldn't. She couldn't keep pretending that this was the future she wanted. Slowly, quietly, she got out of bed and began packing a small bag, just enough to get her through the next few days. She wasn't sure where she was going or what she would do next, but she knew she couldn't stay. Not like this. Not when everything inside her screamed that she had to step away to find herself again. As she finished packing, she turned one last time to look at Ethan, the man who had made her believe in something she had sworn off. Her heart broke as she quietly left their shared space, the door closing behind her with a soft click that felt final. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know if she would ever be able to reconcile her feelings for him with the life she had worked so hard to build. But one thing was clear, she couldn't stay, not until she figured out who she was outside of him. And so as the door clicked shut behind her, Lily took the first step into the unknown, unsure of where it would lead, but knowing that it was the only way to find the peace she so desperately needed. The future, whatever it held, would have to wait. For now, it was just her, and the uncertainty of what came next.
The days that followed Lily's sudden departure were a blur of confusion and ache. She had left the only place she had truly felt like herself in months, Ethan's apartment, without so much as a second glance. The quiet of her new apartment, now feeling foreign and empty, seemed to mirror the empty feeling inside her chest. For the first time in what felt like forever, Lily was alone. No whirlwind of events, no pressure from his family, no media frenzy following her every move. And yet, the silence was deafening. She had convinced herself that leaving was the only way to save herself, to find the version of herself that had been buried beneath the weight of her role in Ethan's world. But even in her solitude, the doubts didn't stop gnawing at her. Was this the right choice? Had she really left because she couldn't keep up the charade? Or had she left because she was terrified of how real it all was becoming? The thought of never seeing Ethan again, never feeling the warmth of his hand on hers, never hearing the softness in his voice when he said her name. It felt like 1,000 pounds of regret pressing down on her chest. But more than the heartache, there was the gnawing fear that she had made a mistake. She had built her life on independence, on standing on her own. And now, standing in the middle of a room that felt so much smaller without him in it, she realized that maybe she had never really been as independent as she had believed. She missed him. She missed the way he had made her feel like she mattered, like she was part of something greater than herself. And as the days dragged on, the absence of him, the absence of them felt like a hole she couldn't fill. But as much as she wanted to reach out, to call him, to tell him that she was sorry, and that maybe they could figure it out, she knew she couldn't. Not yet. She needed to rediscover who she was first, outside of the roles she had played for so long. And then, maybe, just maybe, she could see what a life with Ethan could look like without losing herself in the process. That was the hardest part, realizing that her love for him had never been the issue. It was the fear of losing herself to it. Every night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the decisions she'd made. And every night, the thought that she might have given up the best thing she had ever had crept back in, leaving her tangled in the web of her own uncertainty. The hardest part, however, was knowing that she had left him without an explanation, without closure. She had left him with nothing but silence. And as the days stretched into weeks, the ache of that silence became almost unbearable. She could feel him slipping further and further away with each passing day, but she couldn't make herself reach out. Not yet. It wasn't until she heard his voice on the other end of the phone one night, his deep, familiar tone breaking through her thoughts, that she realized just how much she had been holding back. "Lily," he said softly, as though unsure if he even had the right to call. "We need to talk." And in that moment, with the sound of his voice echoing in her ear, Lily realized that the weight of goodbye might not be as permanent as she had once thought. But could she find the strength to face him again? And more importantly, could they find a way back to each other without losing themselves in the process? The future seemed uncertain, but one thing was clear: this was far from over. Lily stared at her phone, her heart pounding in her chest, as Ethan's voice continued to reverberate in her ears. "Lily, we need to talk." His words hung in the air, pulling her in with the force of a tidal wave. She had been avoiding this moment, avoiding the decision she knew she'd eventually have to face. For weeks, she had clung to the idea that walking away would give her clarity, that being alone would allow her to reclaim herself, to rebuild the life she had so carefully curated. But the truth was, being alone had only made her realize how much of herself she had left behind when she left him, how much of herself she was willing to give up for the sake of pretending she could control it all. And now, here she was, staring at the phone, frozen in place, wondering if she could find the courage to face him, to admit to him, and to herself, that she wasn't sure what the hell she was doing. Taking a deep breath, she finally pressed the answer button, the weight of what she was about to hear settling heavily in her chest. "Ethan," she said, her voice shaky despite her best efforts to sound composed. "I didn't expect to hear from you." "I know," he replied, his voice steady but laced with an undercurrent of emotion. "But we need to talk about what happened. About what is happening between us. I can't let this go without understanding where you stand, where we stand." Lily's throat tightened, but she forced herself to speak. "Ethan, I don't know what to say. I've spent so much time trying to figure out what I need, what I want, and I don't even know if I'm capable of giving you what you need." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and she could almost feel the silence stretching between them. When he finally spoke again, his voice was softer, more vulnerable than she had ever heard it. "Lily, you're not the only one struggling with this. I've been trying to convince myself that I could be okay without you, that I could go back to the way things were before, but the truth is, I can't. You are what I want, what I need. Not because it's convenient, or because it fits some ideal my family has, but because you are the one who makes me feel like I can breathe. The one who makes me feel like I'm more than just the weight of my last name, more than the family I was born into, and I can't keep pretending I don't feel that." Lily felt a tear slip down her cheek before she could stop it. She hated how vulnerable he made her feel, how every word seemed to chip away at the walls she had so carefully constructed. She wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe him. But the fear of losing herself in him, in this world, was still there, gnawing at her. "I don't want to lose myself, Ethan," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't want to lose everything I've built. I've spent so long working to get to where I am, and now it feels like everything is slipping through my fingers. I don't know if I can give all of that up." There was a long pause before Ethan spoke again, his voice softer, almost tender. You don't have to give it up, Lily. I don't want you to. But I also don't want to live without you. I'm asking you to trust me, trust us. We can find a way to make this work, to build something together, without you losing yourself, without either of us losing what we are. I can't promise it will be easy, but I can promise that I will fight for us, for you. If you'll let me." His words were like a lifeline, and Lily felt herself clinging to them, as if they were the only thing holding her up. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't an ideal situation. But maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward, a way to love each other without sacrificing everything they had worked so hard for. "Ethan," she said, her voice trembling but filled with a determination she hadn't realized she had. "I can't promise that I won't be scared, that I won't have doubts, but I want to try. I want to try. With you." And just like that, the weight of the decision she had been carrying for so long seemed to lift, replaced by a new fragile hope. It wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be perfect. But for the first time in a long time, Lily felt like she was taking a step forward into the unknown, not as someone she was pretending to be, but as the person she was always meant to become, and that, she realized, was the most terrifying, beautiful thing of all. In the days that followed their conversation, a shift began to take place between Lily and Ethan, subtle at first, like the first rays of sunlight breaking through the clouds after a storm. They had both admitted what they needed, what they wanted, and now, for the first time in what felt like forever, they were taking steps to make it a reality. The pressure hadn't completely dissipated. Of course. His family still had expectations, the media still had their eyes on them, and the weight of their different worlds was still there, looming over them like an ever-present shadow. But now there was something different. They were no longer pretending for anyone, not for the sake of his family or the press, and certainly not for some idealized version of their future that had never existed. They were just two people, figuring things out, trying to make it work. Lily had stopped second-guessing herself, stopped fearing that she would lose herself in Ethan's world. He wasn't asking her to fit into that world. He wasn't asking her to be anyone she wasn't. He was asking her to be herself, to take the leap with him, and that was something she hadn't expected. Ethan had made it clear that he would fight for them, for their relationship, for their future, and in that moment, Lily realized that she had been fighting too, but she had been fighting the wrong things. She had been fighting her own fears, fighting the idea that love and independence couldn't coexist, fighting the notion that she couldn't have both. But now, with each small step they took together, she saw that it was possible. They didn't have to abandon who they were to be together. It wasn't about perfect moments or fitting into the mold that his family or the world had created for them. It was about carving out their own space, one that was just for them. They spent hours talking, really talking, about their fears, their dreams, the things they had kept hidden from each other. And with every conversation, the bond between them deepened. Ethan wasn't the perfect billionaire, and she wasn't the perfect fiancé, but together they were something real. They learned to navigate the complexities of their relationship, to set boundaries with his family, and to step away from the things that no longer served them. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Lily felt like she wasn't alone in it. She wasn't alone in trying to balance her career and her love life, in trying to maintain her sense of self while building something with him. They were doing it together, slowly but surely. They were building a future, not one defined by the past or by anyone else's expectations, but one shaped by what they wanted, what they needed for themselves. And as she looked at Ethan, watching the way his eyes softened when they locked onto hers, Lily knew that this was only the beginning of a new chapter, one where love and independence could coexist, and where she no longer had to choose between who she was and who she could be with him. It wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time, she was ready to face whatever came next together. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of changes, both big and small, but every step they took felt like progress. Lily and Ethan had finally begun to find their rhythm, not just as a couple but as two individuals carving out a space where their dreams, their lives, and their love could coexist. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was real. The pressure from Ethan's family had not entirely disappeared, but Ethan had drawn a firm line in the sand, making it clear to his parents that he was no longer willing to live his life based on their expectations. He had been patient with Lily, giving her the time and space she needed to rebuild her sense of self without the constant weight of their outside world bearing down on her. It wasn't easy for either of them, especially when his family continued to make subtle snide remarks about her unconventional career, or questioned her place in their world. But slowly those remarks stopped bothering Lily as much. She wasn't trying to prove anything to them anymore. She was living her life on her terms, and for the first time she felt proud of what she had accomplished. At the same time, Ethan had stopped apologizing for who he was, and for the first time he felt like he was living authentically, not just as the heir to a family legacy but as the man he wanted to be. He supported Lily's dream of starting her own wedding agency, taking the time to really understand what it would take, and encouraging her every step of the way. No longer did he see her success as a potential obstacle to their relationship, but as an integral part of who she was, someone he admired, and someone he wanted to support. For Lily, it felt like a weight had been lifted. She could breathe again. She was no longer caught between two conflicting worlds. She wasn't just a wedding planner trying to fit into a family who didn't accept her, and she wasn't just Ethan's girlfriend struggling to prove her worth. She was Lily Hartman, a woman with a dream, a woman in love, a woman who was finally figuring out how to make it all work. The day she finally opened the doors to her new wedding agency felt like a victory not just for her, but for both of them. Ethan stood by her side, a steady presence, not as the billionaire groom with a reputation to protect, but as her partner. They were ready for whatever came next. Whether it was more family pressure or media scrutiny, Lily felt like they could face it together. She had learned that love wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about fitting into someone else's mold or meeting the world's expectations. It was about trusting in each other, supporting each other's dreams, and knowing that no matter how difficult the road ahead might be, they were strong enough to walk it together. It was a new beginning. For Lily, for Ethan, and for the life they were building together. A life that was messy, imperfect, and beautifully theirs. As the months passed, the whirlwind of new beginnings and challenges settled into something more stable, something they could both rely on. Lily's wedding agency quickly gained traction, her reputation as a professional who could handle even the most demanding brides growing by the day. She had found her rhythm, balancing her work and her relationship in a way that felt natural, even though it had taken time to figure out. Ethan had been by her side through it all, never once pressuring her to move faster than she was ready, never once asking her to give up on her dream for his sake. If anything, he was her biggest cheerleader, showing up to late-night planning sessions, offering his insights, which surprisingly were often pretty spot on, and doing whatever it took to ensure her success. As for his family, while their expectations had not vanished entirely, Ethan had made it clear that he would not compromise his relationship with Lily for the sake of their approval. He was living life on his own terms, something he'd never really done before, and that meant supporting Lily in every way possible. Their dynamic had shifted from something tentative and uncertain to something solid and real. But it wasn't just about business. It was about the quiet moments they shared, those stolen glances when they passed each other in the hall, or when Ethan would lean in to kiss her cheek after a long day of meetings, his affection as natural as breathing. It was about the conversations that had nothing to do with work, nothing to do with their families, but everything to do with them, their hopes for the future, their dreams, their fears, and yes, the occasional playful banter that reminded Lily how much fun they could still have together, even after all the hurdles they had overcome. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, wrapped in a blanket and sipping wine, Ethan turned to her, his eyes soft, almost searching. "You know," he said, "there was a time when I thought I couldn't live up to everyone's expectations, that I had to follow a path that wasn't my own, just to make everyone happy." Lily raised an eyebrow, a smile tugging at her lips. "And now?" she asked. "Now," Ethan said with a slow grin, "I'm happy to be on a path that feels like mine, and I'm so damn glad you're on it with me." Lily's heart swelled, and without thinking, she leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to his lips. "I'm glad I'm here too," she whispered against his mouth. The road ahead wasn't without its challenges. There would always be the external pressure, the ever-watchful eyes of the media, his family's lingering expectations, but Lily had come to realize that the strength of their relationship didn't lie in avoiding those challenges. It was about how they faced them together, and together they were unstoppable. They didn't have all the answers, and they didn't have a perfect life, but they had something real, something worth fighting for, and for the first time in a long time,
Lily could look at the future with certainty, not because it was guaranteed, but because, with Ethan by her side, she knew they could handle whatever came their way. The strength of them, of their love, was enough.
It wasn't long before Lily realized that the most important decisions she had made in her life weren't the ones she had planned for. They were the ones she had made in the moments of uncertainty, when she had to choose to trust in something other than herself. It wasn't just the wedding agency she had built with her own hands that gave her pride anymore. It was the way her relationship with Ethan had evolved. How they had both learned to embrace the uncertainty, the messiness of life, and turn it into something beautiful. The more they lived in this imperfect world together, the more Lily understood that real growth didn't come from avoiding the challenges but from embracing them, face first. The idea of a happily ever after, once a fantasy she thought was reserved for other people, now felt like something she could reach out and touch. Ethan had become her partner in every sense of the word, not just in business, not just in the whirlwind of family expectations and the scrutiny of the public eye, but in the quieter moments too. In the late-night talks about their dreams, in the quiet mornings over coffee, in the way they both made space for each other's fears and desires. It was in those moments that Lily realized how far they had come. But it wasn't just about the love they shared, it was the trust they had built, the understanding that their love didn't have to be perfect, it just had to be real. The true test came when Ethan, with a quiet confidence in his voice, took her hand one evening and said, "Lily, I've been thinking about something, about the future, not just mine, not just yours, but ours." His words immediately sent a ripple of excitement through her, even though the weight of the moment hung in the air. "What do you mean?" she asked, turning to face him. Ethan smiled, a mixture of excitement and sincerity in his eyes. "I want us to take the next step, not just in our personal lives but in this. I want to make sure that everything we've worked for, everything we've built, is something we can keep building. I want to go all in, on us, on the agency, on everything." Lily's breath caught in her throat as he spoke. He wasn't asking her to join him in some grand gesture or change the world overnight. He was asking her to take the leap with him, to put their faith in the future they were creating together. And in that moment, Lily knew this was it. The leap she had been afraid of, the leap she had always thought was too risky, was the very one she was ready to take now. She wasn't afraid anymore. She wasn't afraid of losing herself in their love. She had learned that true strength came from surrendering to the possibility of the unknown, trusting that the foundation they had built together was strong enough to hold them both. "I'm ready," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm ready for whatever comes next together." And just like that, she realized that their love wasn't a perfect story with a predictable ending. It was something more, something far more beautiful than she had ever imagined. It was a leap of faith into a future where they didn't need to have all the answers, but where they knew they could face whatever came their way, side by side. And with that, they took the next step together, into a new chapter of their lives, filled with the promise of a future that was wide open, waiting for them to shape it however they saw fit. The leap wasn't the end of the journey, it was just the beginning. And this time, Lily wasn't afraid. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, Lily and Ethan's life together slowly began to settle into something that felt like home. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever really was, but it was theirs. They had found a rhythm, balancing their careers, their personal lives, and the quiet moments that grounded them in the chaos of their demanding worlds. Ethan's family had come around, albeit reluctantly at first, and while there were still moments of tension, they were no longer the dominant force in their lives. His mother had softened, offering Lily more support, albeit with an air of cautious approval. His father, however, had remained a steady source of tension, but even he seemed to be getting used to the idea of them being together. What mattered most was the space they had carved out for themselves. Lily had grown more confident in her role, both as a businesswoman and as Ethan's partner. Her wedding agency had become a staple in the industry, with clients seeking her out not just for her skill, but for the authenticity she brought to every event she planned. She had carved a name for herself, one she could be proud of. Ethan, for his part, had taken a step back from the family expectations that had once defined him. He was still involved in the business, of course, but he had found a way to balance his commitments without sacrificing the things that truly mattered to him. His relationship with Lily, their future, and the life they were building together. And more importantly, they were making it work as partners in every sense of the word. There were still challenges ahead. They had both learned that love didn't come with guarantees, and that it required continuous effort, compromise, and a willingness to grow together. But they were ready for it. They were ready to face the highs and lows, the victories and the setbacks, as long as they had each other. One evening, as they sat on the balcony of their apartment, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, Ethan turned to Lily with a softness in his eyes that made her heart flutter. "You know," he said, his voice quiet, almost reflective, "when we first started this journey, I never imagined it would be like this. I didn't know how we would make it work, but I knew I couldn't let you go. You've changed everything for me, Lily." Her heart swelled as she met his gaze. She had heard him say it before, but now, in this quiet moment, it felt even more real. "I feel the same way," she replied, her voice steady, but filled with emotion. "I never thought I'd be here, living this life with you. It's not always easy, but it's more than I ever thought I could have." They sat there in comfortable silence, the weight of everything they had been through settling in a way that didn't feel heavy, but rather comforting. They had both come so far, individually and together, and now, with the promise of a future built on trust, love and mutual respect, they knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. They had built something real, something that wasn't defined by anyone else's expectations, but by their own dreams, their own choices. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, Lily felt a sense of peace wash over her. This wasn't just a story of love. It was the story of two people who had found each other when they least expected it, who had learned to embrace their imperfections and uncertainties, and who had chosen to build a future together. And as they held each other in the fading light, Lily knew that the journey ahead, however unpredictable, was theirs to make. It was the promise of tomorrow, and it was all they needed. The months that followed their quiet moments on the balcony were filled with new challenges, but this time, they faced them with a renewed sense of unity and determination. As the wedding agency continued to flourish, Lily found herself navigating new territories, expanding her business, hiring new staff, and creating an identity for her brand that was both unique and personal. She was no longer just a wedding planner. She was a force in the industry, respected for her authenticity and ability to bring real emotions to every event she touched. But with success came new pressures. Balancing a growing business and a public relationship with a man who was still part of a high-profile family was no small feat. While the media had stopped treating their love story like a spectacle, there were still moments when the scrutiny felt overwhelming, when the public's expectations seemed too much to bear. Despite it all, Lily found herself falling deeper in love with Ethan, not because he was the man everyone expected him to be, but because he was the man he had chosen to become. Every time they faced a new hurdle, whether it was a family disagreement, a challenging project, or the relentless pressure from their respective worlds, they met it head-on, always with each other by their side. One evening, after a particularly difficult negotiation with a high-profile client, Lily found herself feeling drained and uncertain about the future. She had worked so hard to build this life, her agency, her career, her love for Ethan, and yet the constant push and pull of balancing everything was starting to wear her down. As she sat alone in their apartment, trying to unwind after a long day, Ethan came home to find her sitting on the couch, staring out the window, lost in thought. Without saying a word, he sat next to her, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. "Hey," he said softly, his voice filled with concern. "What's going on?" She glanced up at him, the weight of her exhaustion evident in her eyes. "I don't know if I can keep doing this, Ethan. I've built so much, and I don't want to lose it. But sometimes, it feels like there's just too much to carry. Too many expectations, too many things pulling me in different directions. I'm not sure I'm cut out for it all." Ethan looked at her, his expression softening with understanding. "Lily, you don't have to do it all alone. We've been through a lot, and I know we'll keep facing challenges. But you're not carrying this by yourself. I'm here every step of the way. And whatever happens, we'll figure it out together. You don't have to choose between your dreams and our love. You can have both, as long as you remember that I'm in this with you." His words washed over her like a balm, soothing the anxiety that had been building inside her. She had spent so much time carrying the weight of her ambitions, trying to prove herself, trying to maintain control over every aspect of her life. But in that moment, she realized that she didn't have to do it alone. They didn't have to have all the answers, or make everything perfect. They just had to face the uncharted waters together, trusting that their bond was strong enough to weather whatever came their way. As she looked at Ethan, the man who had stood by her side through every storm, she knew that their journey wasn't about avoiding the challenges. It was about how they handled them together. And with him by her side, she felt ready to face whatever came next. It wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be perfect, but it was theirs. And that was all that mattered. As the seasons changed, so did the dynamics of Lily and Ethan's life. What had once been a relationship built on the foundation of uncertain beginnings, family expectations, and the pressures of balancing their worlds, now felt like something steady and strong. They had learned that life would never be without its challenges, but they had also learned that they were capable of facing those challenges together. Ethan had become her greatest ally, always willing to show up, to listen, to support her, no matter how busy or complicated things got. Lily, for her part, had learned to lean into the partnership they had built, no longer holding everything in, no longer believing that she had to do it all herself. They were growing together, changing together, and that realization felt like a weight lifted from her shoulders. But even as they settled into a new normal, a quiet tension lingered beneath the surface. As her agency reached new heights, she was offered an opportunity she had long dreamed of, a chance to host a massive wedding event, the biggest of her career so far. It was an opportunity that would put her agency on the map, that would solidify her place as one of the most sought-after planners in the industry. But as soon as the offer came, so did the doubts. The event was a huge risk. It would require every ounce of her focus, her energy, her creativity. She knew it would be demanding, both in terms of her time and her emotional investment. But more than that, it forced her to confront a deeper fear, the fear of losing herself again in something that wasn't sustainable. She had been down that road before, working herself into the ground for a dream, only to find herself exhausted and questioning what she had sacrificed along the way. The fear that she might lose sight of what truly mattered, the love and connection she shared with Ethan, haunted her. The weight of that possibility was enough to make her hesitate, to make her question whether this opportunity was worth the price it might demand. And it wasn't until one evening, as they sat in their living room, after weeks of her silently wrestling with her decision, that Ethan turned to her with a soft, understanding smile. "You're going to do this," he said, as though he could read her mind. "You're going to take this opportunity, but not at the expense of us. You've built this, Lily. I'm so damn proud of you. But if you want to do this, we do it together. You don't have to carry it all alone. I'm in this with you, and I always will be." His words hit her harder than she expected. She had been so wrapped up in her own fear and doubt, thinking that she had to choose between her success and her relationship. But here was Ethan, once again, offering her the kind of partnership she had only dreamed of. "I'm scared, Ethan," she admitted, her voice small but steady. "I'm scared of losing everything I've worked for, and of losing us in the process. I don't want to fail, but I don't want to give up on us either." Ethan took her hand in his grip strong and steady. "You won't fail, Lily, and you won't lose us, but you have to trust that you can have both. You've already done the hardest part, admitting that you don't have to do it all on your own. And I'm not going anywhere. We've built something amazing together, and we'll continue building it. But you're not alone in this." In that moment, Lily realized that the leap she had taken so many months ago, when she had decided to open her heart to Ethan, to trust him, and to step into the unknown, wasn't the only leap she would have to make. This too was a leap of faith, not just in her ability to balance everything, but in the strength of their partnership, in the love they had built together. She didn't have to choose between her dreams and her love. She could have both. And for the first time in a long time, with Ethan by her side, Lily felt ready to take that leap into the future they had always dreamed of, together. The weeks leading up to the wedding event were a blur of non-stop planning, late nights, and the frantic energy of preparing for what could be the biggest project Lily had ever undertaken. As much as she had dreaded the overwhelming pressure, she had learned to embrace it. With Ethan's unwavering support, she found herself managing both the business and her personal life in ways she hadn't thought possible. They had spent hours together in her office, going over every detail of the event, brainstorming ideas, making decisions,
and just enjoying each other's company in the chaos. It was strange how something so demanding could feel so right when they were facing it together. As the day of the event drew closer, Lily felt the familiar anxiety creep in. What if it wasn't enough? What if something went wrong? But with Ethan at her side, she had learned to quiet those fears. He wasn't just her partner in the business. He was her anchor, reminding her every day that success wasn't about perfection. It was about passion, dedication, and knowing when to lean on each other. The event, when it finally came, was nothing short of spectacular. From the meticulously planned details to the seamless execution, everything came together in a way that exceeded her wildest expectations. Clients and competitors alike were impressed, and Lily knew that this moment would define the next chapter of her agency's growth. But as the final touches were put in place, and the guests began to arrive, Lily found herself standing at the edge of the ballroom, watching it all unfold, and a sense of peace washed over her. She had built this, she had worked tirelessly, pushed herself to the limit, and now it was here, standing before her in all its glory. But in that moment, the success of the event didn't feel like the most important thing. It was Ethan's hand, warm and steady in hers, that made her heart swell. They had come so far together. They had faced the chaos, the doubt, and the pressures of their worlds, and they had found their way to something real, something lasting. As the night wore on, and she caught a moment to steal a quiet glance at Ethan across the room, she knew without a doubt that they had created something far greater than a successful business or an impressive event. They had created a life together. And when the event finally ended, when the last of the guests had gone home, and the lights dimmed in the venue, Ethan turned to her, his eyes full of pride and love. "You did it, Lily," he whispered, his voice filled with awe.
"You're incredible." She smiled up at him, feeling the weight of all they had accomplished, and all they had become. "We did it," she corrected softly, squeezing his hand. "And I couldn't have done it without you." They stood there for a long moment, not needing to speak, letting the quiet of the night settle around them, knowing that the world they had built together was just beginning. As they walked out into the cool night air, side by side, Lily felt an overwhelming sense of certainty. This was their forever. It wasn't defined by business success or societal expectations. It was defined by their unwavering belief in each other, the way they had learned to trust, to love, and to grow together. She didn't need a grand gesture or a clear, perfect picture of the future to know that the life they had ahead of them was something worth cherishing. Together they had found something more lasting than perfection. They had found love, partnership, and a future built on the foundation of everything they had faced together. And as they stepped forward, hand in hand, Lily knew with all her heart that no matter what came next, what they had was enough. And it would always be enough. The weeks leading up to the wedding event were a blur of non-stop planning, late nights, and the frantic energy of preparing for what could be the biggest project Lily had ever undertaken. As much as she had dreaded the overwhelming pressure, she had learned to embrace it. With Ethan's unwavering support, she found herself managing both the business and her personal life in ways she hadn't thought possible. They had spent hours together in her office, going over every detail of the event, brainstorming ideas, making decisions, and just enjoying each other's company in the chaos. It was strange how something so demanding could feel so right when they were facing it together. As the day of the event drew closer, Lily felt the familiar anxiety creep in. What if it wasn't enough? What if something went wrong? But with Ethan at her side, she had learned to quiet those fears. He wasn't just her partner in the business. He was her anchor, reminding her every day that success wasn't about perfection. It was about passion, dedication, and knowing when to lean on each other. The event, when it finally came, was nothing short of spectacular. From the meticulously planned details to the seamless execution, everything came together in a way that exceeded her wildest expectations. Clients and competitors alike were impressed, and Lily knew that this moment would define the next chapter of her agency's growth. But as the final touches were put in place, and the guests began to arrive, Lily found herself standing at the edge of the ballroom, watching it all unfold, and a sense of peace washed over her. She had built this, she had worked tirelessly, pushed herself to the limit, and now it was here, standing before her in all its glory. But in that moment, the success of the event didn't feel like the most important thing. It was Ethan's hand, warm and steady in hers, that made her heart swell. They had come so far, together. They had faced the chaos, the doubt and the pressures of their worlds, and they had found their way to something real, something lasting. As the night wore on, and she caught a moment to steal a quiet glance at Ethan across the room, she knew without a doubt that they had created something far greater than a successful business or an impressive event. They had created a life together, and when the event finally ended, when the last of the guests had gone home, and the lights dimmed in the venue, Ethan turned to her, his eyes full of pride and love. "You did it, Lily," he whispered, his voice filled with awe. "You're incredible." She smiled up at him, feeling the weight of all they had accomplished, and all they had become. "We did it," she corrected softly, squeezing his hand, "and I couldn't have done it without you." They stood there for a long moment, not needing to speak, letting the quiet of the night settle around them, knowing that the world they had built together was just beginning. As they walked out into the cool night air, side by side, Lily felt an overwhelming sense of certainty. This was their forever. It wasn't defined by business success or societal expectations. It was defined by their unwavering belief in each other, the way they had learned to trust, to love, and to grow together. She didn't need a grand gesture or a clear, perfect picture of the future to know that the life they had ahead of them was something worth cherishing. Together they had found something more lasting than perfection. They had found love, partnership, and a future built on the foundation of everything they had faced together. And as they stepped forward, hand in hand, Lily knew with all her heart that no matter what came next, this what they had was enough, and it would always be enough.